Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to present not my work, but the presentation on behalf of two people living with MND. Their determination to ensure people can maintain their independence against pretty tough odds has led to a number of inventions. I'm going to talk about one of them, and I think for us in the MND Association, to raise awareness of pieces of new technology or new approaches that others might not be able to hear about is really important. So some scene setting, just in case people don't know about the demographics in the UK, you may know there are up to 5,000 people living with MND in the UK at any one time, and around 80% of those might need to use a powered wheelchair at some point in time during their disease progression. Many of them will also have impaired speech and need to use a communication aid, some form of AAC. In the UK, we've got a different approach to some other countries. The NHS taxes us, and that's probably a good thing in some situations. And I was reflecting on some of the conversations about hospice care and who is going to fund treatment after you utilise some hospice support. In the UK, the NHS has a responsibility to assess and provide equipment. So things like wheelchairs or AAC are on loan to people with MND. So it's really important that if you're considering any form of adaptation, that the structural integrity of the kit isn't affected in any way. So there is a problem. How can you independently drive a powered wheelchair if you're progressively losing hand function? Many of you will have looked at different ways of adapting equipment. You'll have looked at different types of switching opportunities as impairment progresses. But what do you do when all control methods have failed? At that point in time, most people with ALS MND then have to rely totally on a carer or an assistant to move them around. Somebody referenced earlier on fighting fiercely to maintain your independence. And I think that's what a couple of people have really tried to do. So this is just the type of challenge the Eyedriveomatic team responded to. Patrick Joyce is a person living with ALS MND. He's a family man. He's got a couple of young children, and he was an artist and a sculptor. So that actually gave him a good eye to seeing things in 3D, to problem solving, to creating. He was the leader of the Eyedriveomatic team. He's also quite good at inventions. So some of you will have also seen his Speakbook, which is a low-tech communication aid. And currently, I believe he's working on a robotic arm to put on his headphones, and his rationale behind that is just because he can. Steve Evans, he's also a person living with ALS MND. He's got a young family, and actually when Steve received his diagnosis of MND, he had 3 very young triplet sons. He is completely reliant on a powered wheelchair, as is Patrick, and he is completely reliant on his eye gaze system. So he was the ideal test pilot. And the last member of the team was David Hopkinson. He's the filmmaker, and you'll see some really good examples of his work very shortly. And if you want to go on YouTube and have a quick look, he's got some great clips on there as well. So what was the idea? Patrick envisaged a mechanical or robotic hand to physically move the joystick, and it would interface with the user's eye gaze system. And crucially, there would be no modifications to the loaned equipment. So there would be no drilling into the wheelchair, there would be no tinkering with the AAC software or any of the hardware. As I say, this is on loan from the NHS, and they wouldn't take great pleasure in receiving kit that had big holes drilled in them later on. I'm not terribly good at explaining exactly what the system is, so I thought Patrick would do a much better job than I could.
If you're an electric wheelchair user who already has a chair-mounted computer with eye gaze equipment to control it, yet you're unable to operate your own wheelchair, then Eyedriveomatic is for you. Eyedriveomatic is a simple addition to users' existing equipment that allows them to control their wheelchairs using only their eyes. Using eye gaze and specially written software, the user is able to direct an electronic hand, which physically moves the chair's joystick. The resulting system produces smooth, safe movement, capable of fine, accurate control even on rear-wheel drive chairs. All functions of the wheelchair can be operated with Eyedriveomatic, much as somebody with normal hand movement could. The user can change speeds and even recline the chair using only their eyes.
Eyedriveomatic is now available to buy from this website.
You can also build your own. The Eyedriveomatic system was designed to be built at home. All the parts can either be 3D printed or purchased cheaply off the shelf. A competent DIYer can build one easily, without special tools, for between £1 and £200. All the files necessary to make your own Eyedriveomatic are available free on this website. The Eyedriveomatic hardware has three main components: the brain box, the electronic hand, and a rechargeable battery to power its two servos. The brain box contains an Arduino Uno microprocessor and a relay shield. The relays provide switch control for up to 3 external devices. 2 of these are often used for selecting options on the chair's controller and as an emergency off button for turning the wheelchair off. But what you use them for is up to you. If you would like to
Order Eyedriveomatic
or have any other questions, please let us know. There is a contact form on the Get a System page.
When I first saw Eyedriveomatic, I had quite a number of questions to ask. And I'm a physio by background. I'm not a wheelchair therapist. So I went and visited Steve with Fiona Eldridge, one of our wheelchair therapists. I was concerned about using eye gaze outside. And Steve was at odds to say that no eye gaze system will work in full sunlight. In fact, sometimes it's difficult to use eye gaze in bright light on its own anyway. So Eyedriveomatic is an addition to assistant or carer control. It's not a replacement. And I was also worried about safety. Where was the kill switch if you're whizzing along in your wheelchair? And my concerns were heightened when I saw that there are actually 4 speeds for Eyedriveomatic, depending on your skill and your confidence. Slow, medium, fast, and manic. So that was a bit of a concern. And Steve was at odds to say that hazardous environments, he wouldn't think of driving his Eyedriveomatic if he was going to put himself at risk. If there was a curb and he couldn't be in total control or is a bit unsure, then he would be using carer or assistant control. He didn't want to go over a curb and risk tipping over in his wheelchair. So Eyedriveomatic has got a system where you can stop it by stopping the gaze on the eye gaze system. It also has an override system through the assistant controls at the rear, the attendant controls at the rear of the wheelchair, and also a carer or an assistant can lean forward and just take the mount over the top of the joystick off, and that will stop the system in itself. So what are the outcomes from using Eyedriveomatic? Now, I personally think there are some psychosocial benefits, but that needs further research, and I'd like to touch on that a little bit towards the end of this presentation, if I may. There is certainly reduced carer burden and definitely increased independence, and I'd like to quote Steve here. Steve says, "I still use Eyedriveomatic every day, and even with the limitations, such as eye gaze glare, I would be lost without it. I drive around the house and outside will drive short distances. Even just the ability to turn to change your view or see something of interest is immensely liberating after years of being dependent on others. Also, it's great being able to recline the chair yourself, as it enables me to lift my head and relieve neck pain." And many of you in the audience will be thinking, well, is this useful for other disease presentations?
Introducing our first two beta testers, John Ostenberg and Steve Thomas. John was 24. Until Eyedriveomatic, his attempts at driving his own chair with a switch were unsuccessful. This is his first ever go driving with his eyes. Steve was in the same situation as John O, though for a different reason. This is his first go.
So you can see there, that's a person who was born with a disability and then was given some independence, and somebody who had acquired a disability and had had independence taken away. Patrick and Steve were delighted to be awarded the Hackaday Prize in 2015. The award is for aspiring engineers and inventors, and Patrick and the team beat nearly 1,000, gosh, that would have been impressive, wouldn't it? 1,000 other entrants. The prize was either a trip into space or almost $200,000. And as Patrick said, it was a team effort, and squeezing 3 people onto one seat in a spaceship would be a bit of a challenge, so they took the cash. Patrick and Steve are very keen for as many people as possible to benefit. So the hardware and software is all on open source, so if you want to access it, you go online. And also it's very low cost. You can purchase a system for under £200, including postage and package. And earlier on I mentioned that Steve had 3 young sons when he was first diagnosed, and that was some time ago. I also wondered about psychosocial benefit, but I'll leave you to think about whether there is or there isn't.
Steve plugged the Nerf gun into a spare socket on his Eyedriveomatic with fantastic results.
Hi, Dad.
Thank you.
Karen. Thank you, Karen. Okay, questions, comments from the audience on this one? Can I see any hands anywhere? Yep. No? No. Yep, go on.
Hi, I'm Lynn, actually working on the wheelchair project and with Fiona Eldridge when she was in post. Have you had any liaisons with statutory services, the wheelchair services, feeding back from any of the Eyedriveomatic?
We've only had one statutory service who's been really happy for any of this to be used with them. They're nervous about safety, obviously, but once people are reassured about, this is an assistance rather than something that is going to take over the use of carer or assistant control, then they're comfortable. This hasn't been used in many instances in the UK. There have been about, 10 systems shipped internationally, but only about 6 systems in the UK. So this is early days, but I think probably a great opportunity for people to have a degree of independence.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more hands? No? Yeah, okay, down here, please.
Hi.
Have we Mark coming down here?
Hello. Hi.
All right, let's take that one
me
first
over
then.
here. Jackie Hill, I'm from Derbyshire in the UK. I couldn't see how well it worked, but my only knowledge of these types of systems is using a scanning where you have an arrow for straight, an arrow for, right, etc. But that looked more versatile. I mean, is that the case?
It's got a few more parameters on it, so it's not north, south, east, west. There's a few more in between, so it's a bit more versatile. And Steve is a very skilled eye gaze user, so that makes it look relatively easy. So you probably need quite a bit of practice.
Thank you. We have one in the middle here.
Amy Roman, speech therapist, and I had a question about one of the classic issues people have when they use eye tracking is that it blocks your view, because unlike some other access methods, you really need it kind of straight in front of your face. And so I was wondering how that was reconciled with driving.
A challenge. I mean, you're right. It's one of the problems of any eye gaze system that's right in front of your face. As you can see from Steve being out in the park, he could see enough in front of him to get where he wanted to be. And I think he predominantly uses that in his own home. So your own home surroundings probably more than you would, I wouldn't use Eyedriveomatic along the banks of the Liffey probably. So,
Thank you. Any further questions? No? This side? No? Okay, well, thank you then to Karen for that presentation.